Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. This week we have the schus of reading Matos Masei. I want to focus on Parshat Masei. Before I do, I want to just give a thanks. You've never seen him because his name is Yoni Fram and he's the guy behind the camera. But he's been filming this for the last year. He's going to the army soon. I want to wish him Tzeitchem l'shalom. He should go in peace and in safety and return in peace and in safety. And thank you very much. Okay, I want to focus on only two Rambans this week. I think that they're related and that they're connected. The first one, in theory, is famous, although I think it's more famous in the Ramban and the Sefer HaMitzvos than it is in the Ramban ala Torah. But in fact, this is where it all comes from. So let's go to Perek Lamed Gimel. We're in Masei. And the Torah tells us, Daber al b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem ki atem ovrim et hayarden el Eretz Canaan. Literally, the people are on the border. V'horashtem et kol yoshvei haaretz mipneichem v'ibadtem et kol maskiotam ve'et kol tzalmei masechotam ta'abedu ve'et kol bamosav tashmidun. Okay, the Torah tells you v'horashtem et haaretz. And from here, I don't even think it's a machlokas. I just want to be clear. I don't think there's a machlokas Rambam and Ramban. I mean, technically, the Rambam does not count the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Israel, and the Ramban does. But I don't think it's a substantive machlokas. I think the Rambam thought there was also a mitzvah. I think, there are many, many explanations for the Rambam. I think there are many, many important values in our religion that the Rambam doesn't count as a mitzvah. I think, to focus on that as an actual debate, I think is misleading. But in theory, when you read the psukim, you can read them one of two ways. You can read them as descriptive. This is predictive. This is going to be something that's going to happen in the future, and you should know that. Or you could read it as proscriptive. No, this is a requirement. V'horashtem et haaretz, not just that you'll get rid of the goyim, but that you'll live in the land. Okay, and then the Torah continues. V'horashtem et haaretz v'yishavtem ba. Again, v'horashtem et haaretz v'yishavtem ba. Ki lachem natati et haaretz lareshet ota. Which is a bit of a question. What's the connection between the Reisha and the Sefer of the Pasuk? V'horashtem et haaretz v'yishavtem ba. Why? Ki lachem natati et haaretz lareshet ota. Because I gave it to you. And finally, v'hitnachaltem et haaretz b'gorah l'mishpechotechem larav tarbu et nachalato v'lama'at tamid nachalato el asher yitzei lo shama hagorah lo yihiyeh l'matot avotechem titnachalu. That's the parsha of inheriting the land. And says the Ramban, famously, I think, on those psukim, first he says as follows, Al da'ati zo mitzvat asehi. Says the Ramban, living, according to my opinion, says the Ramban, he knew that the Rambam didn't count it, but he says, according to my opinion, this is a mitzvah saseh, living in the land, not just inheriting the land, not just kicking out the Gentiles, but living in the land is a mitzvah saseh. Yitzaveh otam sheyeshvu ba'aretz v'yirshu ota. Why? And here's like the chiddush of the Ramban, the way he reads the pasuk. Kihu nitana lahem. Right? The reason we should love the land, says the Ramban, is because God gave us the land. And there's a value in loving that which God values. If God gives us something, lahavdil or not lahavdil, I've experienced this myself. If you give your wife an anniversary present and she doesn't like it, you feel bad. Okay? If God gives us the land and we don't live in it, we're rejecting God's gift. And that's no small thing. And he says, V'lo yim asu b'nachalat Hashem. We don't have the right. It's a halachic value, says Ram. We don't have the right to reject the gift that God gave us. Ve'ilu ya'ale al datchem lalechet v'lichbosh eretz shinar or eretz ashur v'zulatan ulihit yashev sham. And let's say you decide, to conquer another land. Let's say you decide to conquer the 5 towns, or Teaneck, or any other place in America, or in London, or in South Africa, right? Ya'avru al mitzvat Hashem. You'll be in violation. You'll be mevatel in mitzvat Hashem. The mitzvah that God gave us is to conquer and to occupy the land of Israel. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, the Ramban, because he knows that as a technical halachic matter, this is a debatable point, right? So he says, Umashi hifligu rabotenu b'mitzvat hayeshiva b'Eretz Israel. The fact that Chazal, in many, many Gemarot, exaggerate or emphasize the nature and the critical nature of living in the land of Israel. V'she'asur latzeit mimena. And that's us to leave Israel. V'yadonu kimoredet. Here's an example, right? A woman who refuses to make aliyah when her husband wants her to make aliyah is a moredet. V'yadunu kimoredet, as a rebellious woman, ha'isha she'eina rotze la'alot im ba'ala la'eretz Yisrael. Right? The husband says, it's a Gemara at the end of Ksuvos, the husband says, I want to make aliyah. The wife says no. He can divorce her without a ksuba. But it's not just, some kind of a man-focused halacha. He says, v'chein ha'ish. If she wants to make aliyah and he doesn't, he has to divorce her and he has to pay her the ksuba. Bikan nitztavinu b'mitzvah hazo. And says the Ramban, if as a technical halachic requirement or problem, you're looking for a source, this is the source, our pasuk. V'horashtem et haaretz v'yishavtem ba. That's the source. Ki hakatuv hazeh hi mitzvat aseh. The Ramban repeats the point he started with. Because this is a mitzvah aseh. V'yachzir ha-mitzvah hazo b'mekamot rabim. Right? Many psukim, like bo u'rshua ta'aretz. It's all over the Torah. It can't be, says the Ramban, that it's not a mitzvah aseh. Okay, now, let's pretend for a second. Well, let's not even pretend, but let's just focus on it. I sometimes think to myself, I have this chus of living in Efrat. I sometimes think to myself, every third person I meet in Efrat is a ger. It's an exaggeration. But there are many, many gerim. And I ask myself, why is it that so many gerim made aliyah and live in Israel? And I think the answer is, well, if you're upending your life and you're changing everything over, you're throwing out all your dishes and you're starting over, well, isn't it obvious that God wants us to live in Eretz Israel? Isn't it obvious? Didn't anybody read the Torah? There's a famous story in Rav Kook that people were arguing with Rav Kook about, is it a mitzvah, is it not a mitzvah? And he said to them the equivalent of, what are you talking about? Did you ever read Chumash? Right? The whole point of Chumash, the whole direction of Chumash is that Am Yisrael, like every other nation in the world, gets its own land. But we didn't just get any land, we got the land that was chosen for us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Ramban will say here, what, we're going to say no thank you? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you gave us a land, but we've chosen not to live in it? Right? So if you grow up frum, sadly, you know tons of frum people who live, in all kinds of the centers that the Jews live in Chutz La'aretz. And how could you say to them, well, what are you doing here, right? That's where Jews live. And Jews learn Torah, and Jews daven, and Jews do chesed. They do all the things that's expected of us. But says the Ramban, that's a form of v'lo yim'asu b'nachalat Hashem. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a land, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to us, this is the land I want you to live in, it's a rejection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to say, sorry, I don't like it, I don't want it, right? So there are all kinds of explanations, and far be it from me, a person who made Aliyah in his 40s, to lecture anybody, and I apologize if I came across that way. But once you're here, it's kind of hard to not realize how special it is and how lucky we are. And, it's true, everybody supports it and everybody does all the things they do from Chutz La'aretz, and it's all great. But it's not the same as living here. And so here the Ramban says, this is the makar. If you're looking for a makar, here's the makar. The makar is v'horashtem et haaretz v'yishavtem ba, ki lachem natati et haaretz lareshet ota. Right? Because God chose this land, it becomes the chosen land. And if we choose not to live in the chosen land, in a way, we're rejecting HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God forbid. Right? There are all kinds of details, there are all kinds of explanations, and there's no question that a person can live a religiously satisfying life in Chutz La'aretz. He can do great things, and he can teach Torah, and he can learn Torah, and he can daven, and he can support his community, he can raise. All these things are true. But it's not the land of Israel. And the Ramban, who was, I think, the first person and the only person in history to be exiled to Eretz Israel. Right? The Ramban lived in Girona, Spain. At the end of his life, he was involved in the disputation with Pablo Cristiani. And okay, different transcripts of that. Our take is certainly the Ramban won. The king gave the Ramban a gift for being, quote unquote, a person who argued so successfully in favor of the wrong cause. The king obviously was a practicing Catholic. But when the people who lost the debate wouldn't let it go, the king exiled the Ramban. And the Ramban, at the age of 70 or 71, left Spain and made his way to Eretz Israel, where he lived for the last 2.5 years of his life. So you could say, it's not at all clear where or when the Ramban wrote his Perush al Torah. We understand that he wrote it, it was written over many, many years, that it was only sort of put together at the end of his life, and that even in Eretz Israel, the Ramban wrote back, corrections to be inserted in his Perush of the Ramban al Torah. I did not look. There is a sefer published by the Michlala, and it's really incredibly well done, showing which parts of the Ramban were fixed in Eretz Israel. We used to think there were like 10 of them, but now scholars sat down with manuscripts and what have you, and figured out there are hundreds of them, some very significant, some not. I did not look. I apologize for when this Ramban comes from. And you could say, well, if the Ramban felt so passionately about Eretz Israel, why did he live in Spain? Okay, first of all, it was much more difficult for a person in the 1200s to make Aliyah than it is for people nowadays. I understand flight problems and Iran and all kinds of things. Much, much more difficult, and maybe it was pikuach nefesh, but I don't know. I don't feel the need to answer that question. I feel the need to just relay and present what the Ramban says and what the Ramban did. And at the end of his life, the Ramban moved to Israel, and the Ramban thought it was a real religious value. And we'll see it, hopefully, also in the next Ramban, which will sort of be mashlim this Ramban. The Torah has, at the end of Masei, so it's Perek Lamed Vav. Let me get there quickly. Okay. The Torah talks about the punishment for committing murder. And there's a really, really interesting pasuk there. No, it's not Perek Lamed Vav, it's Perek Lamed Hey. Let me read you some psukim. Remember that phrase, b'chol moshvotechem, which more or less means in all the places you live. Kol makei nefesh lefi eidim yirtzach et harotzeach. If there are witnesses, the murderer has to be killed. Ve'ed echad lo ya'aneh b'nefesh lamut. An eid echad can't sentence a person to death. Now, v'lo tikchu kofer lenefesh rotzech ashu rasha lamut kimot yumat. You can't take a ransom in favor of somebody who killed. He has to die. V'lo tikchu kofer lanus el ir miklato. You can't even take a payment from him, right? He killed b'shogeg. He's going to go to an ir miklat. Lashuv lashevet ba'aretz admot hakohen. Right? Let's say somebody, God forbid, runs over a little girl. Terrible, terrible accident. So he says, I feel terrible that this happened, but I don't want to go to an ir miklat. I'm going to donate $1 million to build a new school. Right? That should buy me out of an ir miklat. And it's a very valuable thing. No one would argue with that. Says the Torah, you can't do that. V'lo tachanifu et haaretz asher atem ba, v'lo tachanifu, we'll try to translate that word in a second. Asher atem ba, ki hadam hu yachanif et haaretz, because blood, the killing of a Jew, is machanif, the land, v'la'aretz lo yichupar ladam asher shupach ba ki im b'dam shofcho. And the land won't be satiated. The land won't think that fairness has been done unless you kill the murderer. Okay, now here's the Ramban. V'lo tachanifu et haaretz, says the Ramban, Pasuk Lamed Gimel. Mipnei shamar tchila v'hayu eile lachem l'chukat mishpat l'dorotechem b'chol moshvotechem. The Torah has already told us that the rules of murder apply in all places, right? B'chol moshvotechem. She'elu hamishpatim nohagim gam b'chutz la'aretz. Right? Okay, how do you put somebody to death in chutz la'aretz is a technical problem. But in theory, says Ramban, this is the din for the entirety of the world. Nevertheless, says the Ramban, chazar v'hichmir biyoshvei haaretz yoter lichvod hashchina asher sham. Says Ramban, it's true that the rules and the punishments for murder apply in all places. But there's something unique about Eretz Israel. And when the Torah says v'lo tachanifu et haaretz, it means the land of Israel. What's so unique about the land of Israel? So says the Ramban. V'he's here shalom nachnif ota v'shalom netameh ota. There's a unique prohibition on being machnif Eretz Israel and being mitameh Eretz Israel. V'inyan hachanufa hu hane'emra biklalot. Chanufa, says the Ramban, is what we're going to see in the Klalot, where the Torah says, Zer arav totzi asadeh u'ma'at te'esof. Kramim titav v'avarata v'yayin lo tishteh. Zeitim yiyu lecha v'shemen lo tasuch. Kol eitzcha u'priad matecha yiyaresh atzelatzal. You're going to do your part. Your part is planting and plowing and watering and sowing and all the things. But nothing's going to come of it, because the covenant between you and the land has been broken. It's been broken because lo tachanifu et haaretz, which when you read between the lines in the Ramban, basically equates to you because you've been unfaithful to the land. Now, what does it mean to be faithful and what does it mean to be unfaithful? So when we think of these things, we think of them, a spouse is faithful to his or her spouse, right? A spouse is unfaithful to his or her. There has to be somebody on the other side. And I'm either faithful to that person or I'm not faithful to that person. But says the Ramban that Eretz Israel, ki'ilu, is a person. It's an entity. It has feelings. You can insult the land of Israel. You cannot insult, Johannesburg. You cannot insult London. You cannot insult Cleveland. But you can insult Eretz Israel. You could be unfaithful to Eretz Israel. And that's something you have to pay for. Ki kol chanufa asot hefech hanireh v'hanidmeh la'einayim. Chanufa is to do other than what seems obvious, other than what you signed up for, right? If I got married, so the plan is to be faithful. If God forbid I violate that, I'm unfaithful. Says the Ramban, there is a covenant between us and Eretz Israel, and maybe we're unaware of it. But the Ramban says it exists. And therefore, v'hu onesh be'eretz ba'avodas gilulim u'b'shvichas damim u'v'gilur arayos. Right? If we do the big three and we offend Eretz Israel, so what's going to happen is we're going to plant and it's not going to grow. Not as a punishment. Eretz Israel is going to refuse to give us back what we put into it. Okay, zeisim yiyu lecha v'shemen lo tasuch. There's no oil, right? Kramim titav v'avarata v'yayin lo tishteh. It's not going to work. Zer arav totzi asadeh. You planted a lot, u'ma'at te'esof, but you're going to harvest very, very little. That's the land saying, if you're not going to live the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to live, I'm going to object. Okay? Now he has a bunch of psukim from Tanakh. This is from Yirmiyahu. Halo chanef technaf haaretz, v'aretz chanfa tachad yoshvea, v'tachanifi eretz biznutecha. Okay, so that's the first thing. So says the Ramban, there is something unique about Eretz Israel, and obviously this goes back to perhaps why the Ramban sees the previous Ramban that we did as being not descriptive, but prescriptive, as being a thing I have to do. Eretz Israel is going to be offended by us if we don't live in it. That's really the truth. And so here the Ramban says, if God forbid you kill in Eretz Israel, the land can't abide that. It's chanufa. If I let the guy buy his way out of going to Ir Miklat, that's velo tachanifu ataretz. I'm unfaithful to the land. The other pshat in chanufa or chanifa is false flattery. It's like I'm pretending to be frum. I'm pretending that these things really matter to me. But l'maisa, I'm letting somebody buy his way out of it. Says the Ramban, no, maybe that works in Chutz La'aretz. It doesn't work in Eretz Israel. In Eretz Israel, the land is special. The land is an actor. The land ki'ilu has feelings. And it's going to respond on its own. And it's going to kick out people who disobey it. That's with respect to Chanufa. Now, with respect to Tuma, he says, V'inyan ha-tuma, shetihiyeh ha'aretz tumeya, v'lo yishkon ba kvod Hashem bihiyot ba dam naki. Right? If there's unavenged blood, if there's the blood of innocence is spilled in Eretz Israel, the land will become tameh. It will chase out the Shechina. Shalom nit kaper b'dam shovcho. Right? Literally, the Torah wants, just let's assume in a case where there are two witnesses and they saw it all from beginning to end and they warned him and he said, Va'afa pikein, I accept it. I know you're going to punish me. I'm doing it anyway. I hate this person so much. Says the Ramban, the land won't abide if that person isn't killed. That's not justice. That's not what the Torah wants. That's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. That's not what Kiviyachol, the land, wants. Uvesifrei amru, v'lo tachanifu et haaretz, harezo azhara lechanafim, ki he's here mitchila shelo nikach shochad berotzchim. The Torah said you can't take a bribe. V'chazar v'he's here shelo nachnif lohem lema'alatam. Right? Yes, he's going to build a yeshiva. He's going to do something great with his money. But that's false flattery. That's basically saying, okay, he's such a great person. The fact that he ran over a little girl doesn't matter. O l'tokfam ukvod mishpachtam b'li mekach shochad. Right? He comes from a really important family. How am I going to make him go to Ir Miklat? Ki manachnu nachanif lahem, hine nachanif et haaretz tachad yoshveha. If we falsely flatter this person, if we're unfaithful to halacha, we'll be doing something to the land. The land is an entity with feelings, and then by the land I obviously mean Eretz Israel. It has feelings, it cares, it responds to what we do. And if we're unfaithful to the land, and we put a person's, family standing in the community, or we allow somebody else to get out of it because he's an important person, that's chanufa. That's chanifa. V'lo tachanifu et haaretz. That's the false flattery that we have to avoid. Why? Go back to the first Ramban. Because Eretz Israel is a special place. Because Eretz Israel is the place that God chose. And the upside of that is that the land responds to us. The downside of that, and perhaps we've seen some of that this year, is that the land responds to us. And when we're not who we're supposed to be, it's probably better off to live someplace else. But when we are who we're supposed to be, and when we aspire to be more, and when we aspire to be B'nai Torah, and we aspire to be Ohavei Hashem and Yirei Shamayim and all the things that we aspire to, what better place would you want to live in? You want to live in a place where the grass grows because you keep halacha. I know that sounds strange, but that's what the Ramban is saying. The land is pleased with us and it returns its favor to us because we either keep the Torah or we don't, God forbid. That's why, that's why you want a Beis HaMikdash. That's why you want a Mishkan. That's why these things are so important to us. because we aspire to more, and we want to be better, and we want to be someplace where the land appreciates the efforts that we're making. And there are no guarantees, and it's not like living in Israel, brings you instant peace. Far from it. But the feeling that God is part of our lives when we live here, and the feeling that that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants of us, that's what the Ramban is saying. Okay, so we basically did only 2 Rambans today, but they're both related. One, the Ramban on living in Eretz Israel, not just settling the land, but living in Eretz Israel as a mitzvah